The kernel of Dharma is respecting each other and respecting everything that is there in us. So respecting ourselves, what nature has given us, respecting the relationships that we build with each other, always giving more than what we take in any situation, with yourself, with others, with nature, with just these three elements. Are you giving yourself more than what you take with your body, with your mind, with your emotion? Are you giving more than what you take in your relationships? Are you giving more than what you take with the nature? Think about the ideas of freedom and reason. Now, what is this freedom that they've discovered? There's a lot of debate within that. Sartre talks about existentialism. There is, of course, Descartesian. There's a lot of debate within the Western civilization around what is the nature of freedom. Nietzsche, of course, had his own ideas around it. But fundamentally, when it comes to the element of informing culture and guiding the actions of everyday life, what happened is that this freedom just meant one thing. This freedom meant the freedom to. And the freedom to is the freedom to say anything, the freedom to consume anything, the freedom to go anywhere you want, the freedom to own everything, the freedom to infinity through the material exploration. That is the freedom that their engagement with reason gave them. And why is that? Because I think, therefore I am. That is my fundamental experience. And because I'm capable of thinking and capable of reason, I will make reasonable decisions. And because I'm capable of reasonable decisions, I need to have infinite freedom to exert infinite choice to actually gain what I want out of my life. That is the axiomatic truth of that civilization. Now just examine this a little bit more. Now you use reason to gain freedom, and you make the argument for freedom as freedom to consume, freedom to engage, freedom to indulge. And through that, you get into a sensory overload. You get into a situation where your experiences and your craving for experiences just keeps increasing exponentially. There is something missing there. If you're really free, you actually need to be free from this kind of craving. You need to be free to actually let go. You need to be free to say no. Somehow there seems to be a paradox that you've deployed reason and you've used the economic logic of the baker who is self-interested, which then generates utility for everyone. But you use that utilitarian logic to produce drugs, to produce a society that is nearing 50% divorce rates. The very fundamentals that civilization has been built on for thousands of years has now been put into jeopardy because you have this notion of infinite freedom. So what is really missing here? What is missing, if you were to ask from a dharmic lens, if human beings were capable of this reason, if we are such extraordinary beings, who need infinite freedom, why are we not able to handle ourselves? Now, if you think of it, it feels like there is a vacuum. There are, in fact, two central gaps in that. One is about the sacred. One is the idea of something divine, something beyond the human sense itself, which is, of course, which has been relegated to the matter of religion, and because science cannot discuss religion in the West, they have that chasm. But even within freedom and reason, there is a fundamental theory of mind and self that is missing. You're not able to recognize that you are, at the end of the day, a physical constitution, a mental constitution, an emotional constitution, a psychological constitution. And whatever acts you engage in affects all of this. If you're going to use your freedom to chase sensory experiences in infinite ways, then that has a fundamental impact on this apparatus called your physical body. It has a very negative impact on this psychological formulations that you have, because it doesn't seem to give you freedom. It actually traps you into more bondage, because mind, at the end of the day, is not satisfied by just one experience. And why is that? Here, if you were to look at it from the yogic lens, This is the praxis that the Indian civilization has, which is the missing link between their moral goals and the human constitution. You can all have moral goals, that is fine. But unless you have a theory of reality that is tied to your physical, emotional, psychological existence, you're not going to actually have results of this moral imagination. You're in fact going to cause more damage. What is the fundamental theory that yoga gives us? It is very basic. The ancients in India are extremely pragmatic as much as they are abstract. They look at your constitution and say you are fundamentally certain elements. Right? In Ayurveda, you can say something in Tridosha. In yoga, you can say sattva, rajas, tamas. All of these things, depending on what your starting point is. And that is also the beauty of Indian knowledge systems, that it does not matter where you start from. You can start from Vedanta, you have to get to yoga. You can start from Ayurveda, you have to get to yoga and Vedanta. You can start from all of this, then you realize that Nyaya is in fact the grammar to understand all of these things. You can look at all of these things, but to understand the specific, you need to go to Vaiseshika. So you look at the compact and the integrality of this knowledge system, regardless of where you start from. Over a period of time, if you're sincere, you will get to it. But what does yoga tell us? Yoga keeps it very basic. It says that you have sense organs. I'm not even going to the Gnan organs, right? You talk about your 5 senses. What is happening as a lived reality every single second of your existence? These organs are going out into the world. They are coming into contact with objects. Even as you hear right now, this is an object. You're listening to this, right? And they relay the data back to you. All of this data from the sensory object interaction is being relayed back to you. Now, when this information reaches back, the first thing that happens is that there is a registry of an I. There seems to be something called I that registers this. And the entire existential inquiry in the Indian tradition is, what is this, right? And then when they make this inquiry, they go into the depths of this. At the first level, there seems to be the outer sheet of just raga and dvesha. The first registry of this data is, I like it, I dislike it. I like it, I dislike it. Constant, incessant labeling of all your experiences as your likes and dislikes. This is registering at the aham level, the ego level, loosely translating. But there also seems to be an emotion that we attach with it, right? There is something deeper in us, which is what we call the idea of manas, the seat of emotions, where we know that is the truth, right? Like we discussed about the mother's love, there is no other validation required for that. There is a seat of emotion within you that is able to tell you about that experience. But the Indian inquiry does not stop there. It says there is something else called buddhi, which is the discriminatory intelligence. All your likes are not good for you. All your dislikes are not necessarily something that are bad for you. There are things that you like and you should stop doing. There are things that you dislike and you should do more of. That is the discriminatory intelligence of knowing how to exercise your freedom. Your freedom is not freedom if you're just going with a compulsive loop of your likes and dislikes. Your real freedom is the ability to discern which of my likes aids my well-being, which of my dislikes also aids my well-being. Only take those and discard the rest. So this is the buddhi. And then, of course, the deep root of all of these things, where all of these experiences are stored as memories. A very functional basic understanding is that this is the seat of your memories. And all you're doing is replay your memories and replay your samskaras. All you're doing is the minute the sensory data comes in, it registers, it taps into some kind of latent samskara, you end up chasing that. How many times does this happen to any of us? You go into a place, you get a smell, automatically it triggers a memory, and you want that experience. You want to actually have that, right? And by then, you're not a conscious being. You're essentially a compulsive person. You're just chasing that because you want to rekindle, re-trigger that emotion, that that happiness, that transient thing that you felt at that time, which is life, which is okay, which is fine, because all of us have to have these beautiful experiences. But the process of this experience generation, what the West thinks as freedom, is actually not freedom, because it is a compulsive loop of raga and dvesha. So what is happening here is that they have a theory of reason, a theory of freedom, and they've used that theory of and reason and freedom to produce extraordinary success materially, But the mind is still not settled. Contentment is still distant. Happiness and harmony is elusive. That is because there is a fundamental architecture to yourself which is different to the theory of reality that you've given to yourself. Right? That challenge is what the yogic praxis is able to help us understand. Now, the genius of this civilization, so far we've looked at what is the idea of pro-social behaviors, what is the link between knowledge systems and culture and therefore behaviors, what is the history and historical experience that generates ideas of knowledge and truth, what is the Western idea of truth and knowledge, what is the yogic critique of that truth and knowledge, and how can we register this. Now, the genius of this land is that it did not just stop there. It did not end with philosophical, intellectual inquiry. The reason those all the people in the villages have come together for the train accident in Balasore and offered the 11th day ritual is not because they understand yoga, Vedanta, Nyaya, Vaiseshika. No, they came there because for them it's a daily lived thing. This is an unparalleled intellectual, cultural achievement across any civilization at any time. That there is no gap between the ideas and your daily existence. That is the very definition of a lack of stress-free life. If you really understand the process of stress, stress is nothing but what you claim to be and what you are. The gap between your external saying and your internal being. And that is being generated systematically because they are putting the aham, they're putting the raga dvesha on steroids by incessant economic production. And you are not refining the instrument to deal with that. You only have finite capacity, you are overloading it, and you're somehow expecting that this will manage. It does not manage. It is fractured within itself, and therefore the culture is also fractured. But here in the Indian civilization, this is an integral civilization that first focused on refining and elevating the instrument, the mind, body, energy complex, so that it can then look at all the choices that the culture, the civilization is producing, and then say, this is good to this extent, this is good in this context, this is bad in this context. That is why Dharma is simultaneously the universal, the contextual, and the personal. There are three elements that make Dharma, because the same decision that you and I take might not be the same judgment. It is a function of what is the context, it is a function of what is the universal, the Samanya Dharma, the Vishesha Dharma, and the Chetana, and the consciousness through which you're able to act. All three have a role to play in the decision making. And here in the Western civilization, there's only the universal episteme. There is no space for context, there is no place for consciousness. And that is the challenge that you are having. And if you look at this as the Dharmic culture, which is able to bring the high philosophy into everyday life, and if you really generate that wonder in yourself about your own history, about the reality of Bharat and why this continues to exist for over 5,000 years without generating this multi-crisis at 1.3 billion people, right? How did they actually not reach this multi-crisis? It is because they've given themselves ideas of life which are tethered to reality. And there, the civilization, so if that is a culture, there is a certain institutionalization of these ideas that has given us this civilization. Culture is a set of values that we learn through socialization. There is a process of meeting, knowing, sensing each other and the environment through which culture develops. If I say this, it is only decodable in this audience. If I say this in a culture that does not understand this, that I am going down to you, I know this is Purusha, this is Prakriti, we are coming together, you and I are the same. Unless we are able to understand this, even if you don't understand the high philosophy, you're able to know that this is a mark of respect. This is a mark of greeting. But cultural sense making, if it doesn't have that, then this has no meaning, right? But there is a way in which cultures become civilizations. And that is why it's important to understand the Dharmic lens from a civilizational perspective. Bharat has created three fundamental institutions for the culture of this truth to actually spread all over the world. Now, if you were to ask that question that we raised earlier, how is it that the word dharma, karma, rana, or any of these ideas that you have, across such diversity of language, terrain, food habits, whether it is the ocean culture or whether it is the hill culture. How is it that these words brought this land together and people together? And there is a beautiful example that comes to us about the difference in the Indian civilizational making as opposed to the nation state sort of idea that you have today. And Kapil Kapoorji talks about this, about a 10th century poem. How was this land or this culture formed? The prince of literature married the princess of poetry, and together they went on a walk. And as long as they could travel and spread ideas, that became one desha. Look at the beauty of this. This is not on one skin color. This is not on one language. This is not on one caste, regardless of what some people try to tell us. This is not on the basis of one creed. It is on the basis of some ideas that are deeply personal, but extraordinarily universal. Space-time continuity only happens for an idea, particularly, for any idea, for any culture, only when these two things are coming together. It has to be personally true, because unless you and I experience it, we are not going to subscribe to it. Clearly, nobody is going to subscribe to it over such a long period of time. But at the same time, it also has to be universal so that I can communicate it and you can understand it as your own experience. So this combination of the deeply personal and the universal expressed as ideas, which has come to us as culture, has been institutionalized to give you and I a civilization. And the three institutions that have come together in this, the first institution is the institution of family. This is the emphasis on the family that has held the Indian civilization together. This is the master institution that they've created, because all science also tells us now that you inherit cultural and genetic makeup. It is both. It is co-evolution of both these things. And the learnability, the ability to learn for human beings, happens in a space where these things come together. So all of our learning, fundamental human learning, fundamentally happens in families. And that is why that was an extraordinarily productive system, where the family and the profession was tied. The second institution that they created for you and I is the Gurukula. The knowledge system, all the things that we spoke about as Darshana, the Vedanta, the Shed Darshana, the knowledge systems is the institution. Just think about this. Walk down the street in any place in India, if you have a temple nearby, you will hear recital. And they are saying the mantra the same way, in the same intonation, with the same words that it was said in 5,000 years ago. There is no digital technology. There is no transfer. There is no RAM. There is no internet wire transfer. There is nothing. They've made use of the technology that we have as humans. And they found that certain natural patterns of repetition, when you practice, is the best way to store content and replicate it without a fault. And that sound fidelity, what we call mantra of those divine sounds, has been transmitted for over 5,000 years with the greatest pedagogy. Today we hear this as mind, heart, and hands. But if you look at the central pedagogy principle of Bharat, they talk about 3 levels of learning. They say that some of us can understand concepts, principles. That is called the Prabhu Samhita. For those who understand concepts, they will give concepts. That is the sutra. But not all of us can understand concepts. In fact, all of the philosophical truth was already available to us by the time of Upanishads. Why did the civilization create Itihasa Purana then? Why Mahabharata? Why Ramayana? Why all of this? Why all the Sthala Puranas? Because human beings are absolutely intertwined with storytelling. We only learn and remember stories, not so much the principles. So they storified this. That is called the Mitra Samhita. Look at the beauty of that word. Teaching like a friend. Teaching like somebody who is able to talk to you as a story that is your own, which is also the work that we try to do at Brhat. We want to be the Mitra Samhita for culture, for everyone. But then also realize that some people are so stubborn that they will not listen to even friends. They don't understand principles. They're not as smart as they think they are, but they are foolish enough to also not listen to friends when they say good things. They only listen when they are in love and the beloved asks them something. So they said, we created the Kanta Samhita, the poetry and everything else that is, making you feel good about yourself, to generate that Sahridayata in you so that you are capable of refining yourself. Through this institution of Gurukula, where the Guru is the institution and the pedagogy is this 3-pronged pedagogy, they managed to transmit all of these values into our fundamental core, into our being. And they bought it, one institution, all of these things together. Because remember, culture is a process of socialization. It is not just by our individual learning experience that we create a culture. It is only when you and I come together into a space respectfully that we can create culture. It is in the temple, in the place of worship, that they created and brought all of these things together. Temple is simultaneous the land administration. It is the place where your marriages are performed, the social functions are performed. It is the Gurukula, where the gurus and the Sishyas meet. It is the place for religious gathering. It is the place for mystical musing. It is the place for spiritual solidarity and spiritual practice. They created this space for all of us to get into this. And if you were to just examine one act of your own behavior, you would understand what the magnitude and magnificence of this is. All of us in Bharat, regardless of which religion, which caste, generally speaking, you will have a space in your homes or in your offices that you allocate for the sacred. There's something that you create which is sacred. You are the same person in the rest of the space, in your house or in your office. And you examine your own behavior, your own language, your body language, your sense of entitlement in that space, your sense of dominance and ownership over that space. And you then move into this space that you allocated for sacred. And you see what happens and what transpires within you. We notice that within ourselves, we don't need any other external validation. We become conscious. We become aware of something that is greater than us. We become more pro-social. We become calmer. What they've done is they've created such kind of space everywhere in this vast land for you and I. We actually created the sacred space for all of us to socialize. It is through the cradle of that sacred that we can socialize. You cannot socialize and create sacred. That does not work. Because if you and I socialize, we are more likely to only talk about things that feed into our ego. The civilizational design was to create this sacred space through which you and I, when we socialize, not just have fun, but also transcend. So that is the way. If you are to deal the multi-crisis and understand the Dharmic lens, we have to sacralize spaces, we have to sacralize relationships. And ultimately for all of us, if we are to understand Dharma, like I said at the beginning of this, the kernel of Dharma is respecting each other and respecting everything that is there in us. So respecting ourselves, what nature has given us, respecting the relationships that we build with each other, always giving more than what we take in any situation, with yourself, with others, with nature, with just these three elements. Are you giving yourself more than what you take with your body, with your mind, with your emotion? Are you giving more than what you take in your relationships? Are you giving more than what you take with the nature? If we are able to answer this question personally, and if all of us have a positive balance, that is a regenerative economy. That is a regenerative world. And that regenerative world is the only way that all of us will survive. So Dharmic lens is the ability to regenerate faster than the rate of entropy.